Thank you. Thank you very much, and welcome. I'm Father Mitch Pacwa. Welcome to EWTN Live, where we take a look at guests and meet guests from all over the world. Tonight, we'll look at a truly desperate time for Catholics in France, more than 2 centuries ago, when intolerance toward faith and family led to what some people call one of the history's first chilling examples of genocide, and a true genocide it was. And we'll talk about how to respond to the rising levels of religious persecution we see currently in the world. We'll talk with the producer and the director of the film. It's called The Hidden Rebellion, the untold story of the French Revolution. And you'll be able to see the entire movie tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern Time here on EWTN. Our guest is a native of France. He was also a producer here at EWTN for 18 years. Now he's working as an independent producer and director. Happy to have him back tonight, so please welcome Mr. Daniel Rabourdin. Daniel, comment ça va?
Ça va bien. It's good to be back here.
Good to have you in Sweet Home, Alabama.
Yeah, it's been 6 years now that I left.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm happy to be back. Very nice.
You know, this is a project you've been actually working on for some time.
Yeah, maybe around 5 years.
Yeah,
5 years.
And it's a very important one. A lot of us know a little bit about the French Revolution coming not so long after the American Revolution.
Around 13 years after the independence.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes. And our own revolution ended in the 1780s. We started in 1776, but the war lasted till, I think, 1783. 6 years later, the Bastille is stormed.
In 89.
And then the French Revolution kept on changing as different folks came into play, and it led to incredible bloodshed.
And it's frequently like that with those revolutions. There is always a more radical wave afterwards, and the first ones are frequently eradicated for not being radical enough. And we can see that even in modern days countries.
Sure,
even,
absolutely,
you know.
Absolutely. And you know, this revolution, as it was taken over by different groups and different leaders, assumed prominence in the early 1790s, and it's when you see the rise of Robespierre, who then gives it a whole different change. That was around the time that they made they desecrated Notre Dame Cathedral, had a woman dressed up as Reason and worshipped Reason, and then, as we'll talk about tonight, they became unreasonable with the violence. What was it that they were trying to accomplish at that stage of the French Revolution?
At the stage of the violence and the kind of cult of the reason, I think that at that stage, which was pretty advanced and just before the terror, it's a sort of attempt to replace religion with ideology.
Yes.
A political ideology, which you see every day. You see that in America, even. Reason is good enough, humanity is good enough to be what we can lean against, which can bring wisdom, which can bring order and peace.
And lots of knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, but Christians, Catholic even more, believe in the reason of the Son of the created human being, and believe in the reason in that case that studies nature, the natural order, the natural law, with humility, and learn as a second book, the Book of Nature, compared to the Book of the Revelation. So St. Thomas of Aquinas embraces reason. But the reason for the French revolutionaries put things upside down. Whatever reason decided, even if it was contradictory to reality, was the law. And we see that when people say, I am an animal because I believe I am an animal, and you better tell me I am an animal, or I am of another gender, things like that. As long as the reason for these people say something, that's what counts, or the law. So, for example, for the French revolutionaries, the freedom, the liberty, or the equality was not because people were by nature in dignity equal, what Christianity teaches. It was because reason decided that we would be equal. So equality rested now onto the governments deciding that we were equal. And if the governments would make the law different, such as deciding that it does not apply to the unborn, then that would be okay. So the legal became all that there was, not so much what was right, but what was legal.
This is a very important difference between the French Revolution and the American Revolution. The most basic principle of the American Revolution is that we have unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness,
and we discover
given
that
by the Creator,
exactly,
not by the state.
Exactly.
And the French Revolution said, no, we are following pure reason, and our reason will determine who is more equal than others, and who gets to be more free than others, and who has more brotherhood than others. Those are the three principles of the French Revolution: fraternity,
liberté, fraternité, égalité,
and equality.
And you know what? When I go to France nowadays, I'm thinking, wow, there is way less liberty here than in America. I made there. Where is the equality? I don't see it. And what is the fraternity in the streets of France? You don't see much of that. So it did not work. It did not work at all.
And we have to say, in this country, there were failures at recognizing the inalienable rights to liberty, especially for those who had been enslaved. But that eventually, that gnawed at the conscience of America. And it took a while, but that was exactly why Abraham Lincoln founded the Republican Party, to oppose slavery, because and it was explicit. You see that in his debates with his opponent, Douglas, for the presidency, that Douglas was saying the Supreme Court declared blacks are inherently inferior. Lincoln was saying, no, in the Declaration we recognize that equality and liberty comes from God. That dispute between the role of the state, being able to declare some people inherently made slaves, versus God saying, no, freedom is what I gave everybody. That tension was here,
and I'm very glad that we talk about the distinctions, because frequently people think it's too complicated, it's not worth our time, but some people catch on those concepts, those ideas. Some young people catch on them, and if we don't take that seriously, we get overwhelmed at some point by a new generation that was not taught. So it's important, in my opinion, and that's what I'm trying to do with this docu-film, to take some time to do some homework in distinguishing, in learning again those things that make sense nevertheless, but to be more and more articulate about them, doing some philosophy class amongst us,
because in fact, the French Revolution became more violent when the philosophers were in charge of it.
It's unbelievable, huh?
Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Robespierre were using philosophy to justify the reign of terror.
And I mean, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who one of his main...
For those who don't know, Jean-Jacques Rousseau was a very, very famous French philosopher born in the early 1700s.
Yeah, way like 100 years before. And his ideas worked into the novels of his time, into the theaters of his time,
Yep.
into the songs, and pretty soon it penetrated the minds and the hearts of even the leaders of the country who were overwhelmed at some point. So ideas are powerful, and
Yes.
we have to take them seriously, and we have to be ready to have the true reasonable ideas to counteract and to train and to raise well the younger people into the right philosophy, political philosophy.
Let's take a look at what happened so we can see the importance of their ideas. The region that your movie is about, and it's wonderful.
So
It
it's
really
called
is
the
wonderful.
Vendée.
Yeah, the region is called the Vendée.
Yeah.
What happened in the Vendée that instigated the reign of violence and the destruction of almost 200,000 people? What happened in Vendée?
So to reframe it, the Vendée is a sub-region of France. It's under Normandy. It's in the west. A lot of their names are found in Canada, the same spelling at the end in Louisiana. The Boudreaux, the EAU endings. It's a very much a Vendean name.
Thibodeau, Fontainebleau,
Yeah, it's
all
amazing.
these names are from
Yeah,
there.
it's very touching now that I'm living in Louisiana for a while. So that region was particularly healthy socially, meaning by that the aristocracy had stayed at home and was still a sort of mayor. They were doing the mayor's job. They were doing the peacemakers. They were, whereas in
They were
other provinces,
legislating, governing.
yeah, and they were small nobility. So, and so that's these people that resisted and rebelled against the anti-clerical revolution of Paris, of France, around 4 years later within the revolution. And at first they were open to the French Revolution. It sounded good, equality, that makes sense. It's close to some Christian concept and Catholic concept. But eventually, three major things made them say, we do not like so much that revolution in Paris. The first one was apparently only material. The people of the cities who were less Christian were allowed to buy the goods, such as the presbytery of the priest, the buildings of the church.
The rectory.
Yeah.
The rectory where the priest lives. So they could buy his house.
Yeah. And so there were some material vexation. They were vexed. And then there became a time of ruling of the faith. The Catholic faith was not forbidden, but it became it had to be more obedient to the French government, not anymore to the normal clergy hierarchy with on top the Pope in Rome.
Right.
And the Vendeans saw a very unusual situation that would really amaze us today when the true priest who had a vocation, who was unmarried, who had gone to the seminary, would be taken out. 20,000 of them disappeared.
And they were usually executed.
Or exiled or sent to the Guyana prisons in the jungle of South America. That was French. And it was replaced by whoever. It was, as long as the replacement would be a good revolutionary in the French way, he could become the priest of that commune, that parish. And so the farmers would say no to that. And eventually, the last straw was that the French revolutionaries invented a new concept. The people fighting for the country would be forced to fight if they were French people, whereas before it was professionals. After all, nobility was a caste of people who would fight for the country. That would be small armies, professional armies, and the farmers could stay on their land.
See, that's something that, again, we don't understand quite so much too recently, because we've always had a popular army in the sense that it's from the population in general with drafts and such. In Europe, it was professionals who were trained. This is their job.
Yeah, their job.
And they made their living and hoped to retire off of being in the military.
Yeah, the Swiss Guard was that.
Exactly.
They were basically mercenaries there were around 300 Swiss Guards in Paris who got actually killed by the mob of Paris, but they laid down their arms because they would not shoot civilians. That was not good for them. They were beheaded immediately.
Yeah. We're a little accustomed to those mercenaries here because one of the early victories in our revolution was when George Washington captured German mercenaries working for
British
Army.
Yeah.
That's
an example.
That's an example.
Yeah.
But the French Revolution had a popular army.
So suddenly a huge popular army, 300,000 men were to be conscripted. That was immense. It had never been seen in Europe, in modern Europe at least. Right. And finally, I forgot, taxes would be raised because, of course, if the state would do so much more now, the state now was being the priest, was being the clergy of the country, was ruling the clergy. Their money was needed for that. The state decided to also have an immense army. So taxes were raised, and the peasants added that all together, and they said, we don't like anything you do, but on top of that, we have to pay for things we don't like. So therefore happened this rebellion of the Vendéans.
And it got worse. I'd like to take a look at a little clip from your video about how this genocide went on. Let's take a look at that clip.
Rebellion in the Vendée is more similar to the American Revolution than actually the French Revolution is. The rebellion in the Vendée is happening because there is a power that is trying to usurp the power that the families have had in the Vendée for centuries.
Ils ont humilié la République. Brûlons les fourrages. Massacrez ces bêtes! Massacrez ces bêtes!
De cette politique d'extermination.
Sadly, the extermination policy is very effective. And since the government ultimately wanted to eliminate the population at its source, which is made of the women and children, 80% of those killed are the women and children.
In just a year, as many as 140 to 150,000 people are killed, and this in a very small region of France.
In international law, a genocide is defined as the extermination of a human group based on its ethnic, racial, political, or religious makeup. The definition includes complicity in its conception, putting it into action, achievement, partial or total. So was there the conception for an extermination of a group? Yes, as in the government's laws. Was there an extermination put into action? Of course, the army obeyed the politicians. Was there a total or partial achievement? Obviously. Thus, in Vendée, there has been, at the hands of the French Revolution, a French genocide.
That clip is just a small part. It's very painful to watch how a government would attack its own people because they disagreed with government policies. And the use of violence is a good indicator that they had no real arguments based on reason. All they had was power. And they misused that power to destroy these folks.
And if you think about it, if you do not have religion, you have politics. I mean, if you are somebody who wants to rule a country, you abide by some type of system. If it's the Christian religion, this includes mercy, compassion, and some detachment for results. You believe more in the goodness of the soul, wanting to improve for the eternal life. You are not too focused on succeeding right now. if you take that away, number one, your God becomes what's powerful on earth. It used to be a golden cow. It can be something else. And one of the most powerful things on earth is government. So we see that today, that the people with that, the Christian faith in the Western country, they almost have a religious determination, but a fanatic religious determination for the government to rule and bring peace according to their way of peace. Mm-hmm. And that makes them very irreasonable at the end. Actually, the Christian faith makes you more reasonable. Mm-hmm. And that makes them very frantic. It's got to be done during their lifetime. And nobody can be in their way. And even for the good of the people, they are going to exterminate part of a nation because they're so sure, so convinced that they have the right solution.
This is something that is important. One of the important parts of seeing this movie is the effect that this had in history. Because this happened in France, and you say a couple 100,000 people, okay? But that was part of the deaths associated with the French Revolution that eventually, in the whole of France, was about 2 million. Mm-hmm. And then another million or so died in the wars of Napoleon Bonaparte. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and even before Bonaparte, and he went into Egypt. They fought in Egypt. They they overcame Italy, and then they retracted. So all of the people killed in Italy was for nothing. And then Holland and Prussia, and they were about to invade England. And eventually Napoleon turned toward Russia, sent an immense army of 600,000 men across the plains of Russia just before the winter.
Yeah, bad mistake, as later on the Germans learned in World War II.
Yeah, same mistake.
But it's, and one of the ironies of all this is that it was the French philosophers of that period before the Revolution who had claimed that religion was the biggest cause of war and violence in history. Mm-hmm. But in reality, the number of people who died in Christian wars over 2,000 years was about 2,250,000, maybe 300,000, right in that range. Over 2,000 years of Christian wars.
Okay, and the political wars?
And in just the French Revolution that these people promoted, it was, with the Napoleonic Wars, 3 million. More died at the hands of these philosophers.
And that's a period of around 30 years.
Yeah, versus 2000. Years.
Yeah, we say also that in the first 3 months of the French Terror, during the French Revolution, there were as many deaths as deaths during the Inquisition of Europe over several hundred years. Mm-hmm. And
the number who died in the Inquisition was only about 4,800.
And it's not that we legitimize those deaths due to religious war. It's against the ethic of Christianity, but it happened nevertheless against the ethic, and hence a remorse. But for those ideologues of the totalitarian governments, there is no remorse. Even today, that was the right thing to do. I mean, we can see that about what he said about Cuba. No, that was for the good of the results of Cuba.
The reign of terror only stopped when they stopped letting Robespierre's head stay on his body. Because they they sent him to the guillotine, and finally it stopped because he'd gone crazy.
Yeah.
But there's another way in which this had an impact on later history. Let's take a look at one more clip here about how the Vendée genocide affected 20th century history. Let's take a look at that.
The Vendée is to what Robespierre what Auschwitz was to the Nazis, what the gulags are to Stalin.
Lénine vient étudier.
In communist Russia, Stalin was preceded by Lenin. Lenin, in 1910, came to a little French city called Portnik, which is not far from Vendée. And it would seem that Lenin studied the Vendée extermination, because later, in his journal, the words he uses are words from the War of Vendée. The Russian river, Volga, where Lenin had his opponents drowned, is called his Loire River. Regions in Russia where Lenin is going to exterminate populations are called Vendées.
There are certain things that are politically correct to say and certain things that are not. One thing that is politically correct to say is that Hitler is terrible, terrible, terrible. It's not correct to say that Stalin was worse, worse, worse. But those same mistakes that were made by Hitler were made also by Stalin, also by Pol Pot, also by the various communist regimes that still exist in the world today. And I'm thinking of North Korea. I'm also thinking of Cuba. Think of all of the systems where the individual has to conform to a standard in order to be able to live. People have certain principles. There are certain things we need in order to be able to flourish. One, of course, is freedom, liberty. And by liberty, we don't only mean making our own decisions in society. We also mean freedom to be able to express what we think is correct. The point of acknowledging these rights is to allow the individual to flourish.
This is extremely important because before the 20th century, the number of people who died in secular war was about 141 million in recorded history. In the 20th century, so between 1914 and the year 2000, it was 300 million were killed. And while a lot of them were killed in war, most of those people were executed or starved to death or worked to death by their own government, the way the French revolutionaries had done. And that this was a model for them. It was a model for Lenin.
Yes.
Lenin was a model. He killed 7 million people. And altogether with Stalin, it was 61.9 million killed by their own government. This is outrageous. And the Chinese, under Mao Zedong, at least 75 million. And now there still are concentration camps for the Uyghur Muslims in Western China.
Yes.
Hundreds of thousands are in these camps right now today.
And let's remember that again, why and what's the alternative? The why is because those are ideologies that think that the only solution will be resolved by a centralized government, very centralized government, that the nanny state that takes over every detail of our lives. And it's frequently is called by many people because they think it's going to be the solution to everything. Actually, for once, we have many science fiction movies that are friends of us, that demonstrate so many dictators in those fictions that attempt to bring peace by eradicating every freedom, any singularity, anybody being superior, or like everybody must be equal. So let's really keep that in front of our eyes, that it's this will to over-regulate that hurts so much. But from a state, this is a little bit like the hovering mother over kids who don't want them to be hurt anytime. But the kids don't learn life and never develop they learn life, but they learn life not as well, and they don't develop as well a sense of risk and patience and caution. And that's the alternative. It's a society where there is more freedom. free market societies allow that, for example, and society that admits that the governments must not do everything. And in political science, we talk about the minimal duties of the state. In Europe, they call that the royal duties, which is justice, war and peace, diplomacy, but almost just that. And everything else is supposed to be, in the social teachings of the church, to be taken upon by the church, the charities, even the unions, when they have a healthy attitude, and the families, and the friends of the families, and the small communities, all types of associations, not-for-profits. A very healthy nation is a nation that does most of it, including education, and the government keeps doing the very thing, the major things that small communities cannot do: the war, the peace, the justice,
the mail.
The mail, maybe. Yeah, and we see the difference between mail by government and mail by private, by the way.
Now we do,
Yeah, which is suddenly the French are discovering that. UPS. I should not say that maybe on TV, but they're discovering private enterprise delivering the mail, and they say, that's really nice. They are nice, these people, because so far they've only known the government providing the services, and frequently it's like the Department of Motor Vehicle. The structures don't allow the workers to be really friendly because they're entitled to a job that they have. The sense of the client is not existing as much.
Right.
Yeah.
But I remember a great bunch of stories how when King Abdullah II of Jordan came to become the king after his father, King Hussein, died, people didn't know him very well. So he would put on a kafia, the Arab headgear, and he'd wear it around his face, like many Arab men do. And he'd go to all these little government areas and try to just to see how are people treated and all this. And if you weren't giving bribes, you didn't get service and all. And when he became the king, he cleaned that all out.
Yes.
But it's something that it's easy to get into that mode if you don't let other factors come in. Like,
and it's the structure.
These are your friends.
Humanity in such structures is not delivering a good care for the others, almost always.
We have to take a little break.
All right.
We're going to take some time for you to get your phone calls in. And we'd also like you to watch The Hidden Rebellion, The Untold Story of the French Revolution. And it'll be on tonight, 10 p.m. on EWTN. You'll also be able to get DVD copies of The Hidden Rebellion at EWTNRC.com.
Or also on hiddenrebellion.com.
Yeah, the Hidden Rebellion. I was going to mention that. The hiddenrebellion.com will be another source. And, as I watched this video, I have to say that it reminded me of Wolf in Sheep's Clothing. Many of you saw that. And it helped stir up understanding of the role of our faith in the way we structure society and how we live in society. I think this may be on that same caliber, so it's going to be worth watching. We'll be back in a couple of minutes, so please stay with us and we'll get your questions and comments. right. Are you ready for some questions?
Yep.
Let's start off with Martha. Martha, where are you calling from?
Florida.
Great. We have a whole group of folks from Florida. It's a Florida kind of night.
We love you here.
Oh, great. And what is your question?
Do you see any parallels, either one of you, do you see any parallels between the situation then and the United States? And are we, in your opinion, at any way at risk for such a thing happening here?
Great question. Do you want to respond?
Oh, yeah, you drop that on me now.
Well, I'll take it if you wish, but
No, well, we can see in soft forms what the political correctness does. We hear that on the university campuses it become a little bit heated, and we can see some Antifa violence whenever some students say, no, I don't think like everybody here, and which is what the teachers want you to think. So there is an intolerance that becomes violent physically. We see that. And those students will be the future of America. So they will keep that in their options, you know. So that's at least I try to give you my opinion based on something that we know about. And very interestingly, during the French Revolution, they had their Antifa. Whenever they did not want the government and its army to kill some opponents, such as clergy or the king or the children of the king, they would let the prison gates opened for the mob, the Antifa of the time, the sans-culottes that they were called, with the red striped pants, enter the prisons and kill and massacre the people that had been jailed by the government. So these Antifa are a little bit the muscle of this ideologue that can become a little bit more active with time. So I can also notice that.
Well, one of the other things too, Martha, and this is where American history comes in, we certainly went through horrible stuff when the Ku Klux Klan rose to great prominence in this country. Think back on some of the back in the 1930s, the 20s and 30s, that there were enormous Ku Klux Klan marches down that Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. And you would see thousands of them. And the oppression that they had against African Americans, but also their attacks on Catholics and Jews, was very serious. And while a lot of folks think that the Ku Klux Klan was a Southern phenomenon, they are flat wrong. The largest Klan was in Indiana and Ohio, Connecticut. Oregon was dominated by the Klan at one point, politically speaking, not numerically, but they had tremendous sway in Oregon. And they even got to the point of making Catholic schools illegal in the state of Oregon. Only state to make them illegal was Oregon. And the Klan came riding on their horses to attack Holy Rosary School in Portland. Little kids stopped them by throwing rocks at their horses, and the horses threw them on a bridge, and then they retreated. But we've seen that in an organized way with the Ku Klux Klan. It can shift to other groups who, once you accept some of those principles, then it can, you might not agree with the Klan on race, but you can apply it on other things like you hate religion. So do the same things as they did. So we can't ever forget the lesson of the Ku Klux Klan and the impact that new groups could have today. Ma'am, where are you from?
From Florida.
Great, good to have you here. And there you go. And your question?
My question is, how can something like this happen and people not be aware of this happening long ago, could happen again? Mm-hmm. What is it that people have to do to make acknowledgement of our government doing something wrong to people? We don't know that.
Yeah, okay. So what do you think? Like in France,
I think,
how could people not know throughout France that this was going on?
I think it's called the media of the time, the manipulation of the minds of the people by the media of the time, which were the novelists. Even the clergy, for part of the clergy was very much pro-revolution, so they had the pulpit, they were heard, they had authority. So we can be, what we call a little bit too easily, brainwashed quite easily as people. Now, I'm glad you asked for solutions, because I don't want that we keep complaining and whining and say, oh, that's terrible, and then at the end of this hour, we won't have any hope, almost, any solution. I think one of the ways to avoid it is self-education, not relying on authorities that we think will do the job, but be self-taught, read those books, have the Hidden Rebellion DVD in your library and show it to the parents, to the children and the grandchildren. This is important to pass on the information, and all the good DVDs, and watch EWTN. But so self-education, homeschooling is a great preparation, avoidance. What do you think?
I was going to say that one of the things about learning history is very key. I find, and not only I, lots and lots of other folks are finding, that our American children don't know American history. Now, amazingly, or normally, kids may not be interested in history. For them, ancient history is when they were 8, so that's different. But you still teach them history, so that later on, when they do mature enough to have an interest, they've got a background. Now they don't have a background. They don't know who the presidents of the United States were. They don't know the Constitution. They don't know the laws. They don't know the Declaration of Independence. They don't know, and the heroes, flawed as they were, to be sure, are rejected. They're rejected. And this is a bad state. We don't know the past. We don't see the connection, like we're showing in this video, of past events with modern history. And a lot of folks, a lot of kids, don't know who Joseph Stalin was. Hitler, they have an idea.
May I say something about the children, by the way? I'm glad, so you seek to find solution, and that's a good attitude. And I think we also can be very honest and listen to those who are unhappy presently, and practice what some thinkers in America call compassionate conservatism, like finding the solution. Because if some people are unhappy, there are some reasons why they're unhappy. There are also some bad, wrong reasons, but there are some good reasons, like do they have easy access to private property, to having a home today, the younger people? Can they have easily a family and the support to raise a family? Can they have the time, even to have a mother being able to stay at home? It has almost disappeared, and many say we cannot have the wife not working. And so to find the structures to the country in in a traditional fashion, not in an egalitarian and centralization fashion. There are solutions. Like the school voucher is a solution too, for example, for education. So it's also, I think we have also to listen to the unhappy people and take it seriously when it's to be taken seriously, and try to resolve the issue before it turns into a revolution.
And it's to solve these problems without necessary reference to a political party
Also,
one way or the other.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Let them figure stuff out for sure. But what will really resolve the problem rather than support one political party or another on this? Let's come up with good ways of helping the situation. That'd be key. Sir, where are you from?
Greater Chicago, Illinois.
Great, good to have you here. And your question?
Yeah, you know, many Catholics, especially in this country, have not seen the violent persecution like at the time of the French Revolution. So what would you consider the spiritual lessons for us?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that, almost more after I made the film than before the film. I think one of the big lessons is to counteract one bad spiritual morass where we can find ourselves, which is a sort of despair or lack of the virtue of hope. And when I read the letters of the time of the Vendeans, they wrote journals, they wrote letters. In my docu-film, the voices of the spouses in my story are taken out of true letters of the time, with the words of the time. And in one of them, the heroine says, "Dear husband, I don't know where you are, and we may lose everything, even our lives maybe. But what counts at the end of the day is that we keep having a pure soul and we keep on praying." And frequently, when the Christian is involved in politics or talk about politics, he almost talks, I do too, without hope, as if the end of the times are near, and we forget our eternal life destiny. So if we keep that in check, that bitterness, that despair, because we focus too much into the difficulties of the time and the apparent failures of our time, we have to bring back the virtue of hope, which is like the goal is the eternal life. On this earth, let's do our job the best we can. Let's fight, let's teach, but let's keep also the love of our enemy alive. We have to hate the ideology, but not the people who are into that ideology. And that, to me, is the biggest spiritual lesson that the Vendéens told me, along with the Sacred Heart that they wore, which is also another thing I would love to talk about.
We'll mention, because that's part of it. And this, one thing I would add is this Vendée region was an area of France that Saint Louis de Montfort had evangelized. He had preached throughout that area, and he called people to make the consecration to Jesus through Mary.
Yes.
And this was a key part of how what he did 90 years earlier was passed on and strengthened the faith. And nowadays, we are at a time, I just saw a Pew Research results saying that only 17% of Catholics believe that Catholicism is the way that you go to heaven, that you need to be a Catholic. Now again, we're all sorts of other things you can see in terms of people who never heard about the faith. You deal with that, but the necessity of the Catholic faith, the necessity of Jesus Christ. He's not just one more spoke on a wheel that leads to the center of God, along with other religious founders. He is the way to the Father, and no one comes to the Father except through him. Is this the faith that we ourselves have? And do we pass that faith on to the next generation? If not, then we'll be like those who were willing to do the killing. The soldiers who killed the Vendée people were all raised Catholics. But they were no longer practicing.
May I tell you a story that I was told when I was filming in the Vendée? At the end of a day of filming, one of the figure extra, so my actress, came to me and she said to me, I've got to tell you that story, true story, because it happened 2 miles away of where we filmed today. It was the end of the day. And she said, it's the story of a little girl around 10, and her farm had been destroyed, was burned by the army of Paris, the revolutionary armies of Paris. And she was crying, it was raining, and she was all alone. Comes one soldier of the Paris government, of the French Revolution. And the soldier does not kill her too, but he shoves her into the ditch full of water. Okay, that's pretty bad too. She's about to come out of the ditch when a whole patrol of 8 soldiers approaches and passes on the dirt road. She stays in the ditch. What had the first soldier done? He had saved her life. He had saved her life, and he could have done it because he was alone. If he had been with the patrol, one of the other soldiers would have killed him. That was the process at the time. So those souls are also caught in the system, or the guardians of those gulags, of those and
the concentration
camps. They are caught in that system. So we are warning as Christians or as people of goodwill about what happened in the history, not because people do bad things, but also bad systems exists. And this system of over-centralization, of totalitarianism, of the nanny state is creating very difficult situation for humanity.
That it becomes easy to push your Catholic faith and your Catholic values away from your mind if everybody else is doing the wrong thing. You go along with it.
And some of the Catholics, like in the time of the French Revolution, think that this centralization, control of everything is Christianity. They kind of it's close to it. Some of the clergy believes it. And they look at China and they think, oh, it's pretty good over there because they love an over-orderly society, and they think that extreme order will resolve everything. But it's the contrary, because humanity is meant to be creative by itself, to lead its life by itself, to raise its own children by itself. You can't help. This is the way it works and the way people turn to be happy.
Well, this is a lot of good lessons from your movie. I'm very glad that we're showing it tonight.
And I wanted to offer one of those Sacred Heart badges.
Oh, great. That's perfect.
Yep.
Yeah. It's.
I mean, if you attempt, it may take a little while to pin it.
I'll pin it on later on.
But this is
it's great to have and to remind ourselves we follow the Sacred Heart of Jesus. He's our King, not any other government or any other kind of force. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
you got your new movie, Oath, that you're working on. It's going to be about the Boy Scouts.
Yeah, it's going to be an adventure film.
Good.
Oh, well, here it is. An adventure film. Have you heard about the Catholic action film lately?
Yeah, so this is going to be
it's a new one.
So we got that, and again, The Hidden Rebellion, The Untold Story of the French Revolution will be on tonight at 10 p.m. on EWTN. You get a copy of it at EWTNRC.com or at the hiddenrebellion.com. Thank you much.
Thank you.
And we were flat out of time, so may the Lord bless you all throughout this Holy Lent. Remember to keep Fridays no meat. And Lord bless you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And we can show this film and all the other things we do because of your support. So please keep us in between your gas bill, electric bill, and cable bill, and we'll pay all of our bills too. Thank you, and God bless.